all of us really trusted law enforcement. No one had the inclination that it would end the way it did.
I went over it and over it in my head because it didn't make sense the way it went down. I have been an investigator for 45 years. When I initially started out as a police officer, I spent a lot of time on patrol investigating traffic accidents. I took a real interest in reconstructing crime scenes. I worked on some fairly high-profile cases as a police officer. We actually broke the Ted Bundy case at Viewmont High School with the homicide death of Debbie Kent. And after I left law enforcement, I was called upon a number of times to assist lawyers, law firms, insurance companies in reconstructing accidents. I've investigated drug cases, robberies, homicides, accidental deaths, suicides. I've investigated at least 125 major felony cases. Over a period of time, through the Records Access Management Act and under Freedom of Information Act, we were able to obtain evidence that the police had in their possession. We received 1,100 pages of documents. Of those 1,100 pages, there were that many pages. There's over 300 pages that are redacted. They cut out what they didn't want us to see. I've kind of reconstructed a lot of things here. We placed this exactly the way it was because we have it photographed. I took custody of this scene at 7 o'clock on the 23rd, which was 22 hours after Brian was killed. I was astonished. I was able to direct an investigation right from the beginning and get fresh evidence before it was tainted. That's unheard of. The police did not do a thorough investigation. I recovered 14 rounds. I recovered 7 37-millimeter gas rounds that the police discarded. I recovered black impact rounds, blue rubber foam rounds. Numerous pieces of evidence were left by the police. There was a total of 111 rounds fired by the police, counting the tasers, the explosive devices, flashbang grenades, pepper ball rounds, 2 lethal rounds, and we traced 94 of the 111 from point of firing all the way through everything they touched until they were recovered. And either the police have them in evidence or we have them in evidence. After 2 years and 7 months, the family was able to get a copy of the video that was actually taken by the police. I bought a computer, and those 2 poll camera videos, I was able to put on the computer, download them, and began looking at them very, very carefully. As I learned more and began to piece together the puzzle, I spent more and more time doing this. I spent hours. I'd come in from work every evening and work till midnight. Sometimes I'd work all night. But it became an obsession, and the more I learned, the more it drew me into trying to find the truth. Immediately following the altercation in the house, Brian went out the back door, came around the house, and got in his truck. His father followed him out and stopped by the mirror and is standing right here by the door. Jerry is threatened by the police. They threatened to arrest him for interfering, for obstructing justice, felony charges if he didn't move away from the truck.
After a certain length of time, I finally decided I have to trust them. I've got to trust them. I've got to walk away from this, and they're going to resolve this situation, and we'll move forward.
The police officer that was in here with us took Jacob and myself, and we had to go out through the backyard, through the neighbor's fence. And my aunt took me to the doctor, and then I came home from the doctor, and I went to sleep because they gave me some drugs. And I slept most of the afternoon, and I had no idea. Nobody told me that anything.
Meanwhile, officers have moved into the house. They don't have a warrant, and the house is unoccupied. But the Farmington officer unlocks the front door and lets the SWAT team officers in the house. They cut the screens on the kitchen window. They kick out the screens in the living room window.
There were officers everywhere. They were on the other side of the fence. They were inside the house. They were on the roof of houses and fire department across the street. They've got 80 police officers. They've got highway patrolmen. They've got Bountiful Police. They've got Davis County Sheriff Department. They've got the Farmington City, Kaysville. They got the Salt Lake SWAT team. It's just unbelievable. They've got a helicopter in the air. And during this time, now Brian is not in any way pointing the gun at any persons except himself.
The first assault begins after 3 or 4 hours. As Brian is convinced it's useless, he agrees to surrender and actually opens the door, starts to step out of the vehicle. And at that point, the command center tells the officers here, no, do not let him out the driver's side. Take him out the passenger side. They don't tell him anything. They just open fire with a 40 millimeter impact round that's fired from the living room window, and it hits the window right here and blows out his window. And the first thing he does is, he flips the bird, and they open fire from the kitchen window. They blow out the back windows and struck him in the side of the neck. And so Brian goes down. Instead of surrendering and getting out, he is now injured and incapacitated in the vehicle. It takes them over an hour to allow him to recover enough to follow instructions.
I mean, a chunk of the headrest was torn off. And these are the non-lethal weapons.
I was told that the Davis County District Attorney relayed the message to him that he had committed 5 felonies and that he would be spending the next 20 years in prison. To try to calm the situation down by telling him he had already committed 5 felonies and that he was going to spend the next 20 years in prison, it didn't seem to me to be a very tactful position. I kept telling them, let me talk to Brian. I know I can calm the situation down. They said, absolutely not. They were in control and they were going to handle the situation. All of a sudden, you see this mentality of aggression that is just overwhelming. And once this machine started going in that direction, there didn't seem to be any way to reverse it, change its direction, or slow it down. It seemed to go into more of a military operation at that time.
The SWAT team decide to force him out of the vehicle. They run all the way up to the tree within 4 feet of the window and toss a flashbang that blows up right on by the mirror and shoot 3 rounds of gas into the back seat area. Brian then gets out of the vehicle, and from 3:30 in the afternoon, he stands right here with a phone to his ear and a gun to his head.
Why? Why did this happen? Who's making these decisions?
These are our command vehicle. We have a bomb vehicle. And you have a bomb containment device over here in the corner. About the closest thing we have to being the militarization of our police force is this Humvee that we picked off of our military surplus. When people fall and break their leg or anything, we use this vehicle to be able to get way back into the woods and be able to load them up onto a stoke stretcher and get back out of there where normal trucks just can't get to.
Do you have the Bearcat in here?
We do have a Bearcat. He's out on training right now with it. So
Seems to be a popular vehicle.
yeah,
Last time I was here, it was that.
yeah. It gets utilized. It's designed to carry multiple officers.
Armored military vehicles are all over Utah. This steel Bearcat is at the Davis County Sheriff's Department, but used around the region. Sheriff Todd Richardson says the vehicles like these are used to protect officers, not to intimidate.
You have kind of this perception out there that it's the militarization of law enforcement. It's really me as a sheriff asking a deputy to go into a situation where there's a high probability somebody will get shot. And me as a sheriff preparing that individual with all the tools that I can give him to keep him safe to go handle that situation. And that's, if you want to call that militarization, then that's what it is.
The premise that the cops are becoming more like the military. It is false. In fact, it is a altered reality. The opposite is true. The military has learned from the police, and it is very evident in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, where they've had to go in these communities and be part of the community and still function. The reality is SWAT teams save lives, demonstratably. Many of our weapon systems are saving lives. The Taser, great tool, vilified in many places around the country as an unnecessary use of force and overly dangerous. I personally have seen it save the lives of youth and others. because it's allowed us to not use deadly force. So our tactics, I think, have improved and improved the safety of our community.
Since my family became victims, I've watched more intently than ever the other people like us who have suffered as victims, who have to deal with the loss of a loved one, a family member in this case. And I find we're not alone. There are hundreds and hundreds of people across the country. It's happening several times every day.
Whiskey 7, we're at 3268 Jackson. We got shots fired. We got officer hit. I need medical. I need additional units.
On January 4, 2012 at 8:40 p.m., officers from the Weaver Morgan Narcotics Strike Force were attempting to serve a search warrant on 3268 Jackson Avenue in Ogden. During the service of the warrant, 6 police officers as well as 1 suspect were shot and were taken to local hospitals. The Ogden City Police Department regretfully announces that Agent Derek Frankham succumbed to injuries sustained as a result of this incident. Agent Frankham has served the citizens of Ogden with honor for 7 years. He is survived by his wife and 2 young children. The suspect remains at a local hospital under guard with non-life-threatening injuries. The suspect's name is Matthew David Stewart.
This was a picture he took when he was up at Waterfall Canyon. He liked to climb. He loved the outdoors, and he loved hiking. He used to go up with his little sister. I don't believe that for 1 minute Matthew knew that it was the police that was breaking into his home. They hid their vehicles across the street by the church. They snuck over in single file, being very quiet, to not alert neighbors for fear that they would possibly call the resident and warn them. They had long hair. Some of them, they had beards. They worked undercover. They wore black clothing, Levi's. You know, they weren't in police uniforms. There were no police cars with the lights in front of the house to let somebody know that, hey, you know, we have a search warrant. I think his training kicked in.
Matthew was a communications specialist in the military. He was also airborne. It kind of took me a while to actually even meet Matthew because he was very withdrawn. My relationship with Matthew specifically started growing when he lost his job at the IRS, and we got him a job with us at Walmart. Matthew and I worked the graveyard shift together, so we would go into work at 10 p.m. and we would get off work at 7 a.m. Had they waited 1 more hour, Matthew would have been out on the driveway waiting for us to pick him up for work. None of this had to happen.
We must wage what I have called total war against public enemy number 1 in the United States, the problem of dangerous drugs.
In 1970, 1971, we have Nixon declaring war on drugs. Nixon comes up with this idea of a no-knock raid. Federal narcotics officers across the entire country, they use it gladly, and often they start conducting these mass raids, sometimes without warrants, terrorizing people, getting their own houses. SWAT teams are spreading across the country, but they're still being used only in these emergency-type situations. It really isn't until the Reagan administration that the two trends converged.
We can defeat this enemy.
Reagan had taken Nixon's drug war metaphor and made it very literal.
37 federal agencies are working together in a vigorous national effort. And by next year, our spending for drug law enforcement will have more than tripled from its 1981 levels.
You start to see SWAT teams used primarily to serve search warrants on people suspected of drug crimes.
The war on drugs federally has produced a lot of money that's then trickled down to communities. You see this heavy degree of new tools and weapons and things being given to police officers, but the outcome of that is that you change from the blue-shirted police officer to the battle-hardened, battle gear-laden police officer who looks more like a military officer ready to fight against an enemy.
The use of paramilitary policing tactics is not new. And in fact, in some communities, in particular poor communities of color, it's been going on for decades.
Particularly for people who are disproportionately affected by these policies, there's an increased tension that's going to build up, and a lot of times that can only hit its climax and result in extra violence that otherwise wouldn't be there.